Have you ever stumbled into someone so powerful that a single touch could change your life forever? In this story, our unsuspecting maintenance worker accidentally brushes against a revered alien judge, triggering a law that forces them into a life or death courtship. Will they escape execution, or will they be bound in marriage by dawn? The twists, cultural nuances, and surprising alliances make for one of the most suspenseful encounters you'll ever witness. Stick around to discover how human ingenuity, family secrets, and an unexpected spark can transform a near-fatal mistake into a galaxy-shaking event. Don't forget to subscribe to the channel for more thrilling sci-fi tales. Your support helps bring even more incredible stories to life. Get ready, because the outcome will leave you questioning how fate can turn an accident into destiny. Martin Cole gripped the worn handle of his plasma wrench, knuckles whitening as he tried for the third time to recalibrate the gravity modulator inside ArcLight Station's maintenance tube. The confined space forced him to work in an awkward half-crouch, arms fully extended above him to reach the panel's innards. Sparks danced across the circuit board, reflecting on the metal walls with every misfire of the modulator's power flow. Martin exhaled through clenched teeth, muttering under his breath, "You're not going to beat me today, you blasted thing." The tool slipped yet again, clanging loudly against a pipe and sending a dull echo down the shaft. He was painfully aware that time was ticking. A reading of 86% efficiency flickered on the modulator's holographic display, taunting him. He needed to bring it up to at least 95 if he hoped to satisfy station standards, and anything less could cause uneven gravity shifts in the living quarters. The subtle adjustments required both finesse and patience, two qualities in short supply when you were pinned like a sardine in a can. As sweat dripped from his brow, Martin's communicator crackled, the voice of his supervisor, Chief Birch, buzzing through the speaker. "Cole, status?" Birch's gruff tone made it clear he was not in the mood for excuses. Martin pressed a button on his wrist unit and replied, "Still working on it, Chief. The regulator's calibration is off by more than I expected." "How long?" He hesitated, eyeing the display. 15 minutes if everything behaves. Maybe a bit longer if I have to swap out the junction coil." "You've got 10, Bert shot back. "We're expecting important visitors passing through the central promenade soon. Last thing we need is them floating away because your modulator can't hold the right gravity." "Got it." "Copy," Martin sighed, cutting the channel. Feeling the pressure to perform, he forced himself to move methodically, realigning the coil, double-checking the frequency thresholds, and removing a stray piece of debris wedged between circuits. At last, the readout stabilized at a respectable 94% and began inching upward. When it finally reached 97, Martin released a triumphant breath. It wasn't perfect, but it would do for the next 24 hours until the secondary coil arrived from Earth's supply depot. He tucked his plasma wrench into his kit, pulled himself out of the cramped tunnel, and winced as a cramped muscle in his neck protested. Emerging into the corridor, Martin paused to admire the panorama through the thick viewing window across from him. Hanging in the great void, Earth's blue-green sphere rotated with a quiet majesty. Even after 3 years stationed up here, that view never lost its power. Somewhere beneath those swirling clouds was the city of Port Song, where Martin had grown up learning to repair broken appliances in his parents' workshop. Now, ironically, he was repairing technology light years ahead of what he'd once tinkered with, though the same basic principle still applied. If it's broken, find the fault and fix it. He checked the time again. He was supposed to report in to Birch, but maybe he'd steal a quick trip to the nearest washroom. The standard-issue gray coveralls he wore were drenched in sweat, his dark hair plastered to his forehead. As he inhaled, the recycled station air tasted faintly metallic. ArcLight Station had been built in sections over decades, and the older areas were always a bit less pleasant to breathe in. Still, it was home now, at least for this chapter of his life. Stepping from the maintenance corridors into ArcLight Station's Grand Central Promenade felt like exiting a service hatch into a palace. Here, vaulted ceilings curved overhead, inlaid with pulsing light panels that mimicked an artificial sky complete with drifting, wispy clouds. The promenade bustled with hundreds of sentient beings from dozens of star systems, some distinctly humanoid, others drastically different in shape and composition. Martin sidestepped a trio of Kalthari visitors who resembled lanky amphibians with elongated necks, their red eyes blinking in unison as they conversed in rapid clicks. A moment later, he spotted a robotic courier zipping past on a hover cart, weaving between the foot traffic. Overhead, a colossal holoscreen broadcast news from across the galaxy. Glowing letters in multiple alien scripts scrolled by, accompanied by narrations in galactic standard tongues. A snippet of an interstellar scandal flared across the screen. Human envoy sparks outrage on Ventari world. Cultural mistranslation leads to accidental proposal. Martin suppressed a snort. It wasn't the first time humans had bungled contact with an alien culture because they didn't understand the significance of certain gestures or words. The newscaster droned on about the fallout for the unfortunate envoy, who apparently brushed an aristocrat's shoulder without permission. Lucky me, I just fixed gravity regulators, Martin mused, shaking his head. Despite how often Earth's representatives ended up in these bizarre cultural entanglements, humanity's presence in the galactic community had been largely positive, or so the official reports claimed. In practice, Martin had witnessed plenty of friction when different species mixed, especially in such a confined environment as Arclight Station. He forced his attention away from the drama and took a moment to breathe in the atmosphere of the promenade. Retail stalls lined the walkways, their proprietors advertising everything from exotic star lily blossoms to floating orbs of luminescent algae. A pair of avian-like Lurex ambassadors glided by, trailing incense-laced feathers that left a perfumed scent in the air. Farther down, a bubble-suited merchant from the Jovan system haggled with a scaly proximal trader over cargo rates. The cacophony of voices, the swirl of colors and smells, it was all so overwhelming and, at the same time, exhilarating. Suddenly remembering Birch's orders, Martin picked up his pace. He navigated toward a quieter section of the station, where staff facilities were more industrial and less aesthetically pleasing. Drab steel walls replaced the promenade's sleek architecture, the corridors narrower, lighting more utilitarian. A few uniformed security officers passed him, acknowledging his presence with terse nods. Martin had half a mind to see if he could slip back to his quarters for a quick rinse, but the pressure to finalize that gravity modulator was still fresh in his head. Out of habit, he checked a handheld scanner for any new maintenance alerts. Sure enough, there was a new message flagged. Sector 9 grav plate malfunction. Urgent. Martin grumbled, one thing at a time, and powered off the device. If he couldn't even freshen up, at least he could hurry and report to Birch in person before dealing with yet another crisis. Rounding a corner at the junction that led toward the staff command center, Martin nearly collided with a small group of Saurian engineers, their reptilian tails swishing across the floor. He exchanged a polite nod, stepping aside to let them pass. Just then, something on the holoscreen embedded in the quarter wall caught his eye, a live broadcast about a visiting dignitary from the Galactic Tribunal. The face on screen was regal, a tall being with amethyst skin and mirrored eyes, dressed in flowing judicial robes. The broadcast teased a major announcement and invited everyone on the station to tune in for further details. Martin wondered idly if that might be the VIP Birch had mentioned. If so, the timing was unfortunate. These gravity issues had a knack for flaring up whenever the station needed to impress someone important. Martin half jogged now, focused on delivering his report as quickly as possible. He took a shortcut through a lesser-used passage, one with dimmer lights and exposed pipes running along the ceiling. He recognized the corridor as a back route that often saved him several minutes. At 6 feet tall, he had to duck slightly beneath a low-hanging valve, the smell of hot metal lingering in the humid air. The rhythmic hum of the station's power conduits resonated through the floor, a comforting sign that, for now, nothing else was about to blow. As he emerged from the side passage, his momentum carried him directly into a collision course, with someone stepping out from an adjacent corridor. Their shoulders met in an unexpected impact. Martin's immediate reaction was to shift his weight back and avoid a full-blown crash, but it was too late. He already felt the soft material of ornate clothing under his hand. Time seemed to slow to a crawl. Martin's eyes traveled upward, taking in the tall figure, amethyst skin that shimmered under the corridor's fluorescent light, hair so pale it was nearly white, and eyes that looked like molten silver. Even though he'd only glimpsed that face on the holoscreen seconds earlier, he recognized it instantly. This was Serafina Rael, a high judge of the Galactic Tribunal. By all accounts, one of the most powerful adjudicators in known space. Martin's instincts kicked in. I, I'm sorry, I didn't, he stammered, stepping back and dropping his hand. But the judge's gaze had already narrowed, those silver eyes flashing with a blend of shock and annoyance. You touched me, she said, her voice carrying a subtle, musical undertone. Although she spoke softly, the accusation reverberated in the cramped corridor. Two armed security officers materialized at her side, their rifles angled in Martin's direction. A small aerial drone, emblazoned with the seal of the tribunal, hovered behind them. Its lens focused on Martin, as if documenting every breath he took. I didn't mean to, Martin repeated, trying to sound composed. I was just rounding the corner too quickly. He swallowed hard, the dryness in his throat making it difficult to speak. Serafina's posture was impossibly straight, her robes falling in perfect lines around her. Do you know the statutes concerning unwanted physical contact in my culture? She asked. The drone projected a hollow display in an alien script Martin couldn't decipher. His heart hammered as he guessed what it meant. No, Your Honor, he admitted, I don't. One of the security officers activated his risk communicator. Emergency counsel needed in corridor 15F. Immediate assistance required, he intoned. It sent a chill down Martin's spine. This was no minor issue. In my culture, Serafina began, her voice steady and commanding, an unauthorized touch can be interpreted two ways. The first, an act of aggression warranting formal charges. Martin's stomach turned. If charged, he could face serious punishment, imprisonment at best, if not worse. Or, she continued, it is considered a gesture of formal courtship. A spike of cold fear rippled through Martin. That's not possible. I barely even brushed against you. I didn't know. Ignorance of law does not absolve one from its consequences, she said crisply. Her silver eyes flicked to the drone's display. As the laws of my people are recognized under interstellar treaties, we must interpret your action accordingly. A small crowd began to gather at both ends of the corridor. Word must have spread rapidly about an incident involving a high judge and a human maintenance tech. Some onlookers aimed handheld devices to record. Others just stared with open-mouthed fascination. Martin felt his cheeks growing hot. He'd never thrived in the spotlight, let alone a spotlight that threatened to put him behind bars, or worse. A new figure pushed through the assembled watchers, a short, amphibian-like being, wearing a formal sash and carrying a data tablet. Their bulbous eyes blinked in different directions, suggesting they were scanning both Serafina and Martin simultaneously. The drone recognized this newcomer and shifted its projection to display official documents. Legal advisor Brask, Serafina acknowledged. We require clarification of the code in question. Brask consulted the data tablet, flipping through lines of alien text. Yes, Your Honor, the advisor croaked. According to the treaties, the Tamri laws specify that if an unmarried individual touches a member of the Raelian species, especially one of your rank, without explicit permission, the touch must be categorized as either an assault or a matrimonial claim. Martin's head spun. But that's insane, he burst out. I'm just a maintenance tech. I had no intention of assault or marriage. This is all one big misunderstanding. Brask's large eyes turned toward Martin. I'm sorry, sir, but your intention is immaterial under the letter of the law. They pointed to a shimmering line of text. We have a few sub-clauses, but they revolve around the same principle. The only mitigating factor is whether the contact was malicious or not. Given that Judge Rael has not deemed it an act of harm, we must proceed with the alternative interpretation. Serafina's expression was unreadable, yet there was something almost curious in the tilt of her head. Shall we come to your choice, Mr. Cole? Shall we file charges of assault against you, or shall we treat your touch as a gesture of matrimony? Martin couldn't fathom how his morning had derailed so drastically. Only minutes ago, his biggest worry was that his gravity calibration might be slightly off. Now he was teetering between a potential prison sentence and a forced marriage to an alien judge. Martin struggled, looking around for an ally or a solution. The security officers kept their rifles at half ready. The crowd whispered among themselves. Even Brask, though polite, seemed to hold no more power than an official clerk. He thought of refusing outright, but Seraphina's eyes narrowed as if she expected defiance. Attempting to flee would be suicidal in a place as secure as Arclight Station. Brask interjected quietly, "There is a third option, a formal trial period that lasts one station night. If he fails to demonstrate worthiness, it reverts to an execution under your laws, Your Honor." "Execution?" Martin echoed in disbelief. "You can't be serious." "I am afraid it's all quite explicit." Brask's amphibian throat inflated and deflated anxiously. "If one incorrectly proposes marriage to a Raelian judge of high standing and then fails the subsequent trial of worthiness, the penalty is capital." Martin clenched his fists, every survival instinct urging him to reject this madness. But if he refused and got slapped with an assault charge, the outcome might be similarly grim. A high-profile case involving a tribunal judge wouldn't go lightly in court. In truth, the trial period might be his only path to survival, however bizarre. His eyes flicked to Seraphina's, seeking some hint of mercy. "When does this trial begin?" he asked, voice unsteady. "Tonight," she replied. "My duties on Earth resume tomorrow, so we have limited time. You must decide now, Mr. Cole." It was as if the corridor's temperature plummeted. Martin felt all eyes on him, the weight of the moment pressing on his chest. It was ludicrous, outright insane, to think that because he accidentally brushed someone's shoulder, he might be forcibly wed, or, failing that, executed. He stole a glance at Brask, who gave him an apologetic shrug as if to say, "Yes, this is exactly as ridiculous as it sounds, but it's still the law." "All right," Martin said, trying to steady his voice. "I'll take the trial. Not because I'm eager to jump into any wedding, but because I'd rather avoid spending my life in a prison cell or, getting beheaded." He heard a few murmurs of relief among the bystanders. It was clear many had been bracing for a violent outcome. One security officer moved forward to escort Martin, but Seraphina halted him with a subtle gesture. Her gaze fixed on Martin, and for a split second he saw something flash across her features. Pity, maybe, or the faintest flicker of respect. "Very well," she said, her tone formal again. "Report to my diplomatic suite at 2100 hours, station time. We will conduct this trial under the appropriate protocols. In the meantime, you may go." She turned to the crowd with a regal nod, then swept past in a swirl of robes, followed by her guards and the ever-present drone. Brass trailed after them, tapping notes into the data tablet. As the corridor began to clear, Martin exhaled a shaky breath. This was the strangest predicament he'd ever faced. He reminded himself he still had to file his maintenance reports and probably fix Sector 9's gravity problem before the day was done. The normalcy of these chores was oddly comforting, considering he'd just committed to a life-or-death scenario. His risk communicator beeped, and Chief Birch's voice crackled through. "Cole, I've been waiting for that status update. Where are you?" Martin pressed the talk button. "Chief, something came up. I'll finish the last calibration in Sector 9 as soon as I can." He hesitated, deciding it might be wise not to mention his accidental engagement just yet. Birch had enough on his plate without hearing an unbelievable tale of marriage by law. "Don't take all day, Cole," Birch grumbled. "We've got bigwigs coming through. Keep it together." Disconnecting with a terse acknowledgement, Martin walked briskly back to his modest quarters. The station's temperature felt stifling, or maybe that was his nerves making him sweat again. His quarters consisted of a narrow bunk, a folding desk, and a tiny bathroom with a sonic shower that occasionally malfunctioned. The walls were painted a dull off-white, scuffed from repeated occupants over the years. Not exactly the penthouse suite, but it was home. He flopped onto the bunk, running a hand through his messy hair. "What the hell have I gotten myself into?" he thought. "Computer," he said aloud, voice echoing in the cramped space. "Access database on Raelian judicial customs. Clearance level 4. He knew he didn't have high-level clearance, but perhaps some basic cultural data would be public. A female computerized voice replied calmly, "Access denied. Additional clearance required to view Raelian High Court traditions." Martin rubbed his temples. The universe's most basic cosmic rule, it seemed, was that whenever you needed crucial information, red tape would get in the way. With no open data to help him, he was flying blind. With a glance at the time, just past 1700 hours, he realized he had less than 4 hours to somehow not only come to terms with the situation, but also figure out how to survive this so-called trial. Determined to at least show up prepared, Martin rifled through his small closet to find something halfway decent to wear. His usual station-issue uniforms were plain, serviceable, and covered in grease or scorch marks. He unearthed a dark blue collared shirt and black trousers, items he usually reserved for Earthside visits or station ceremonies. They'd have to do. After a quick sonic shower, one that only half worked, leaving him feeling partially refreshed and partially rattled by the unit's high-pitched whine, he decided to reach out to someone he trusted for advice. Before he could press the communicator, however, the door buzzer sounded. He tensed, wondering if station security had come to whisk him away. To his relief, it was Ebony Reyes, one of the station's communication officers and a longtime friend. She stepped inside without waiting for an invitation, eyebrows furrowed. "Martin," she started in a hushed tone, "tell me it's not true about you and the tribunal judge. Everyone in the comm center is buzzing about it." He closed the door behind her. "I'm afraid it is, Ebony. Accidental shoulder bump, archaic law, forced courtship. Just a typical day in my life." Ebony's eyes widened. She let out a low whistle. "You poor thing, have you gotten a lawyer or something?" He shook his head. "All I got was some amphibian legal advisor who seemed more concerned with following protocol than saving my skin. I have a meeting with Judge Rael at 2100. If I mess this up—" He paused, the weight of potential death settling around him like a steel cloak. Ebony rubbed his arm reassuringly. "We'll figure something out. You could try to reason with her, show that you're just a regular guy who made a simple mistake. Judges respect honesty, right?" Martin managed a half smile. "I'd like to think so, but from the little I've seen, her culture's laws don't exactly bend for good intentions." They fell silent for a moment before Ebony snapped her fingers. "Wait, I have an idea. It might not solve everything, but it could help. In some alien customs, a ceremonial gift can alleviate tension, something that shows you respect their traditions, even if you don't fully understand them. Maybe a small token might put her in a more forgiving mood." He mulled it over. "I suppose it's worth a shot, but I've got no clue what sort of gift is appropriate for Aurelian. I doubt a bouquet of station-grown blooms is going to impress someone who can have me arrested on a whim." "Don't overthink it, Martin. Something simple and honest. You're good at fixing things. Maybe an item that symbolizes that ability?" Ebony rummaged through his clutter. "What about this old gear assembly?" She lifted a half-disassembled mechanical part from his desk, a leftover from some retired station hardware. He laughed. "That's a rusted torque stabilizer, Ebony. Hardly a romantic gesture." She smirked. "But if you polished it up, maybe put it on a stand, it could represent your skill, your commitment to fixing what's broken. That might catch her attention more than fancy jewels or some cliched poem." With no better ideas, Martin decided to try it. By 2030, he'd managed to clean, refurbish, and mount the small gear assembly on a spare piece of polymer. He'd also forced himself to eat a quick meal pack, though anxiety made his stomach churn. The time for dithering had passed. He needed to meet the judge. "Wish me luck," he said to Ebony as he left. "Try not to get executed, all right?" she called after him, her attempt at humor laced with genuine concern. Arclight Station's diplomatic wing was a stark contrast to the rugged maintenance quarters Martin typically inhabited. Instead of unpolished steel and flickering overhead lights, the walls here were glossy white alloy embedded with faintly pulsing veins of golden circuitry. Recessed lamps cast a warm glow that evoked a sense of serenity. Even the air smelled different, tinged with floral essences from far-off worlds. Martin approached Suite 11A, double-checking the room number displayed on his wrist communicator. This was the location designated for High Judge Serafina Rael's residence. 2 station security officers stood vigil on either side of the door, their attire sleek and intimidating. Both wore tinted visors that concealed their expressions, though Martin guessed they were sizing him up. He cleared his throat, gripping his carefully polished gift, a small metal gear assembly mounted on a neat acrylic base. "I'm here for the appointment," he said, voice wobbling just enough to betray his nerves. The guards nodded wordlessly, one pressing a hand against a wall panel to trigger an identity scan. After an unsettling pause while the system verified Martin's biometrics, the door slid open with a pneumatic hiss. Stepping inside, Martin was momentarily stunned by the opulence of Serafina's temporary quarters. The main chamber was vast, at least by station standards, with a tall ceiling that curved into an arched skylight. Through its transparent surface, the infinite expanse of stars glittered like shards of diamond. Floor-to-ceiling windows on one wall offered a slow panoramic view of Earth, half shrouded by night. Plush, circular couches stood in clusters around a central platform, which radiated with ambient light. Subtle music drifted through hidden speakers, a melodic, haunting tune that hinted at an alien scale. Serafina stood by one of the windows, her amethyst skin illuminated by the reflection of Earth's distant glow. Gone were the flowing, judicial robes she'd worn earlier. In their place, she wore a more casual, yet no less elegant garment, a gown of soft, shimmering fabric that shifted in hue whenever she moved. The design accentuated her tall frame, and Martin found himself momentarily speechless. "You're punctual," she observed, not turning around at first. She kept her gaze locked on Earth's rotating sphere. "That's one point in your favor." Her voice still had that gentle, musical quality, but it lacked the harsh formality he'd heard during their first meeting. "I figured being late might be hazardous to my health," Martin joked weakly, stepping further into the suite. The door slid closed behind him with an almost ominous finality. At that, she turned. In the softened lighting, her silver eyes appeared even more intense, capturing the glow and reflecting it back like twin mirrors. "I take it you've come to learn about this trial of worthiness," Serafina said. Martin nodded, carefully extending the small gear assembly. "I brought you something," he said. "I don't know your cultural customs, but I wanted you to know I respect how serious this all is, despite how quickly it happened. This gear is from one of the older sections of Arclight's systems. I refurbished it myself, fixing things. It's my trade. Thought maybe it could be a small symbol of that." For a long moment, Serafina said nothing. She studied the object with the same measured expression she might use when reviewing evidence in court. Finally, her lips curved into a subtle smile. "You offer a piece of your craft, far more thoughtful than the flashy tributes I've endured in the past." Gently, she set the gear assembly on a nearby console. "Thank you, Martin Cole." A digital chime sounded from a hidden panel, signaling the approach of a floating service tray. It glided smoothly into the main chamber, carrying two slender, fluted glasses and a bottle of shimmering purple liquid. Serafina reached out, pressing a tiny control on the side of the tray, and the bottle uncorked itself with a soft hiss. "Raelian star wine," she explained, pouring the luminescent liquid into both glasses. "A customary drink for significant negotiations or ceremonies." Martin raised an eyebrow, accepting the glass she handed him. The fragrance that drifted from the wine was tantalizingly unfamiliar, a delicate mix of sweet fruit and something like ozone. "Thank you," he said, inhaling cautiously. "I don't want to sound ungrateful, but I'm not sure how well humans handle Raelian star wine." "Perhaps you'll discover hidden fortitude," she replied, "or regret your daring." There was an edge of playful challenge in her tone, far more inviting than the stony formality she'd shown in the corridor earlier that day. Taking a tentative sip, Martin was stunned by the electric sensation that spread across his tongue. The flavor defied categorization, but it reminded him of tasting a lightning storm, if lightning storms could be bottled. He coughed once, managing to swallow without choking. Serafina's smile widened fractionally, almost a grin. She took a measured sip of her own. "So," he began, setting the glass on a low table, "this trial of worthiness, how does it work exactly?" His stomach did little flips at the question, but he needed answers. Serafina walked around a curved sofa, gesturing for Martin to join her. She moved with a regal poise, as though every step was choreographed. "Traditionally," she started, "someone who touches Aurelian, especially one of my status, must either be proven malicious or declared a suitor. If declared a suitor, they have one night, the hours of darkness, to show they possess the qualities our culture holds dear. empathy, honesty, resourcefulness, and trustworthiness. If they failed to meet these criteria, she hesitated, silver eyes flicking over him. The consequences are dire. Martin exhaled, sinking onto the plush seat. I'd hoped there was a simpler explanation, but it's exactly what I'd heard in the corridor. Her gaze was steady. You must understand, to physically touch a Motherpalian of high rank is not done lightly. For us, it signifies a profound spiritual connection. Historically, entire feuds ignited over accidental touches, the guilty parties executed without trial. Over the centuries, we refined our laws to allow a slim chance at redemption, especially in cases where violence was not intended. I see, Martin said quietly. He glanced at her hands, noticing how elegantly shaped they were, how she had kept them folded in her lap, perhaps to avoid another unintentional brush. What does that mean in practice? Do I have to recite poetry, pass a labyrinth, fight a champion in single combat? She let out a soft, musical laugh. I've seen all manner of attempts, gifts of rare gems, hollow flattery, even staged battles meant to impress me. Those are as transparent as a child's boasting. I want to see who you are, truly. His heart thumped, though whether from fear or something else, he wasn't certain. You may be disappointed. I'm just a maintenance technician. Serafina studied him for a moment that stretched like a taut wire. I suspect there is more to you than you realize, she said, voice softening again. But you must be willing to show it. Silence settled between them, thick with unspoken questions. Behind Serafina, the earth spun slowly, half cloaked in darkness. Moonlight shimmered on the edge of the planet's horizon, casting pale beams into the chamber. Martin found himself momentarily lost in the view, the cosmic grandeur making their predicament feel both utterly trivial and infinitely significant. Gathering his courage, he cleared his throat. Well, Judge Rael, Serafina, she interrupted, given our unusual circumstance, let's dispense with titles. Don't you think? Martin nodded, grateful for the slight easing of formality. Serafina, then, I want to be honest. I didn't ask for any of this. I barely even knew who you were an hour before it happened. But I also recognize that you didn't choose this either. You were, walking down a hallway when some clumsy human smacked into you? A fleeting hint of humor curved her lips. I'm rarely called clumsy, but I suppose that's accurate enough from my perspective. He couldn't help a small laugh at that. I can't change what happened, but I also have no death wish. I'd like to see if there's a path forward that doesn't end with me executed. He paused, searching her expression. So, how do we begin this trial? Should I don't know, show you the station's reactor control room? Prove I can keep the place running? Her gaze flicked to his refurbished gear assembly, displayed under gentle lighting. You've already shown me a glimpse of your skills. You create order from chaos, repairing what others discard as junk. That's a commendable quality. The sincerity of her praise caught him off guard. He managed a rueful smile. I repair machinery because it's simpler than dealing with people. Machines follow rules. If part X is broken, you fix or replace it. People are more complicated, especially across alien cultures. Serafina's eyes softened. Yet your work is vital. If the station's gravity regulators fail, travelers of all species suffer. There's a certain humility in such work, an essential service but often overlooked. She tapped her fingertips against her glass. Resourcefulness and empathy are indeed two qualities we Raelians value. There is more to you than meets the eye, Martin Cole. His cheeks grew warm at the compliment, unsure how to handle praise from a being so poised and imposing. After a moment, he ventured, I can replicate some Earth food, if you like. You might find it interesting. He recalled the broadcast about a human who'd supposedly proposed to an alien duchess and by offering her some strange snack. In that instance, it had gone poorly, but maybe it could work differently here. She seemed intrigued, arching a slender eyebrow. A culinary demonstration? If you believe it showcases your authenticity, I'm willing to sample your offering. Fair warning, Indy said, rising from the sofa and walking to the embedded food replication unit. Many humans consider this dish a classic, and while it's not refined, it's kind of iconic. With a few quick taps, he requested 2 cheeseburgers, a side of spiced fries, and a pair of vanilla milkshakes. Within seconds, the machine chimed, and 2 trays emerged, each with a neatly wrapped burger, golden fries, and a tall, frosty beverage. Carrying the trays to the low table, Martin set them down. "I present to you," he said, striving for a solemn tone, "the humble cheeseburger and milkshake, a meal widely beloved on Earth, though considered by some to be a guilty pleasure. Let's see if this forms part of my trial." Seraphina peered at the plates, curiosity lighting her features. The star wine still glowed softly in her glass, though, but she set it aside. "All right, human," she teased, "show me this culinary delight." Seraphina picked up the burger tentatively, studying it as though it were an artifact from an alien civilization, which for her, it very much was. She tilted her head, then carefully peeled back the wrapper. The scent of melted cheese and savory sauce drifted upward. Martin couldn't help but smile at the contrast between her regal bearing and the everyday nature of a fast food meal. He took a demonstrative bite of his own burger first. "No utensils necessary," he explained after swallowing. "It's traditionally eaten by hand." She responded with a small nod, then lifted the burger for a cautious nibble. Her amethyst face remained impassive for a moment as she chewed. Martin held his breath, unsure whether she'd find the flavors revolting or perhaps too mundane for her refined palate. A quiet hum of pleasure escaped Seraphina's lips. She blinked in surprise, taking another bolder bite. "It's unexpectedly delightful," she said, sounding slightly puzzled. "The textures, the layering of flavors. There's an indulgent quality that's quite different from our standard rations." "That's the magic of a good cheeseburger," Martin said. The corner of his mouth quirked up. "It's comfort food back home, best enjoyed without concern for calories or decorum." Seraphina paused to brush a stray crumb from her chin, looking uncharacteristically sheepish. "Decorum is our cardinal rule, though I must admit, I don't entirely hate abandoning it for the moment." She reached for a fry, tasting the crisp, salted exterior. Her silver eyes closed briefly in appreciation. "Humans are known for many flaws, but this cuisine, perhaps it redeems a few." He laughed, genuinely amused. "Wait until you try the milkshake." He demonstrated how to insert the straw into the thick beverage and take a sip. She mimicked his action, her eyes widening at the sweet, creamy taste. "This is downright scandalous," Seraphina murmured, finishing one sip and diving back in for another. "I can't recall a time I've indulged in something so blatantly decadent." "Glad it's a positive experience," Martin said. Relief rolled over him in waves. This was going far better than he'd dared hope. Even so, part of him was acutely aware that a single evening of conversation and fast food novelties might not be enough to prove his worthiness. Feeling the need to address the elephant in the room, he set his half-eaten burger aside. "So what exactly happens after tonight, if we decide we can make this work?" He could barely get the words out without feeling the sheer absurdity of it all. "Are we married by morning?" Seraphina swallowed a bite, dabbing her mouth delicately with a cloth napkin. "By the laws of my people, once a second touch is initiated, that is indeed the formal declaration of acceptance. Our marriage would be recognized across Raelian jurisdictions, and by extension, much of the galactic community. One cannot casually break such a bond." Martin let that sink in, a chill crawling up his spine. He remembered all too well that the alternative, failing this trial, carried a capital penalty. "And if neither of us initiates that second touch?" A small tension flickered in her posture, though her expression remained serene. "Then by sunrise, if no acceptance has occurred, the law deems that the trial is over, and your life, likewise, is forfeit." A leaden weight settled in Martin's stomach. He forced himself to look into those silver eyes. "Forgive me if this is blunt, Seraphina, but are you comfortable with that arrangement?" For a moment, she studied him in silence, star wine still aglow at her side. "No," she said finally, "I'm not. But these laws were enacted long before I was born. Even a high judge cannot simply cast them aside without undermining our entire legal structure. Unless—" She stopped, her eyes flicking to the windows in the expanse of night beyond. as though searching for an alternate path hidden in the stars. A heavy moment stretched between them, the gravity of the situation pulling them out of the pleasant distraction of cheeseburgers. Somewhere in the distance, the station's quiet hum changed pitch, a slight fluctuation in the power conduits that Martin, as a maintenance worker, registered instinctively. He fought the urge to check his handheld scanner. Tonight, one misstep could cost his life, and he needed to remain present. Serafina broke the silence first. Would you think less of me if I admitted I find this predicament strangely exhilarating? She placed her burger down, brushing her fingers together. For centuries, I've practiced law across star systems, met countless dignitaries, heard the pleas of criminals, victims, and politicians. I've delivered judgments that shape planetary policies, yet I've never encountered a situation that felt so personal and unpredictable. Her confession caught Martin by surprise. He noted a faint flush along her cheekbones, a subtle shift in the hue of her amethyst skin. He inhaled. I don't think less of you at all. In fact, I'm relieved I'm not the only one feeling unsettled. She tilted her head. You fear me, she stated softly, not as an accusation but as an observation. Martin considered denying it, but honesty felt more appropriate here. A bit, yes, you hold my fate in your hands. You're also, well, you have a presence that's intimidating, but at the same time, I'm trying to see you as a person, not just an icon of authority. Serafina's lips curved into a wistful smile. That is a rarity in my life. Most see only the black robes and gavel, so to speak. They forget that I'm a woman with hopes and uncertainties like anyone else. She paused, drumming her graceful fingers against the table. I suppose this is our first lesson. Vulnerability. If we are to make any sense of this forced union, we have to approach it as two individuals, not as roles in a legal play. The idea resonated with Martin. He reached for his milkshake, more for comfort than hunger, letting the sweet chill calm his nerves. In that case, maybe we should talk about more personal things, he suggested. I grew up in a repair shop on Earth. My parents specialized in recycling obsolete technology. We'd give old items a second life, sell them cheap to folks who couldn't afford the newest models. My father always said, you never know when a simple fix can save a life. That's part of why I joined ArcLight Station's maintenance crew, to do my part in an environment where I could make a real difference. He shrugged, a bit self-conscious. Simple, I know. Serafina leaned forward, genuinely interested. It's not simple at all. It's admirable. Many would prefer the glamour of starship piloting or corporate management. You chose a path that keeps everything else running. Martin felt his cheeks heat again, though he pushed on. What about you? You're hundreds of years old, if I recall from the news briefs. So how did you decide to become a high judge? And what do you do when you're not presiding over tribunals? At that, she let out a soft sigh, crossing her legs beneath the shimmering gown. My species matures and ages more slowly than humans. I was identified early as having an aptitude for logic and mediation. The Tamri laws, the ones that now entangle you, have governed us for millennia. The simplest explanation is that I ascended through the ranks of Raelian governance, gaining a reputation for fairness and ruthlessness in equal measure. Eventually, the Galactic Tribunal appointed me to oversee interstellar disputes involving Raelian domains and beyond. It's fulfilling but isolating. Isolating how? She lifted her gaze, meeting his eyes. Few dare approach me on a personal level. Fewer still dare to breach physical boundaries. There has always been an unspoken wall of protocol. I suppose that's why your accidental touch has turned my entire world upside down. A quiet hush enveloped them, as though the very air recognized the weight of their confessions. Outside the window, Earth's cities glimmered like droplets of gold scattered across the surface. If Martin looked closely, he thought he could pinpoint the continent of his birth, though from this vantage, it was just a patchwork of lights and dark sea. Somehow it reminded him that no matter how large the galaxy seemed, life came down to moments of connection, or missed connections. Serafina stood, taking a few steps toward the window. The soft fabric of her gown glistened with each stride, catching the ambient starlight. I remember the first time I looked upon Earth from orbit, she murmured. It was decades ago by your reckoning. I was struck by how vibrant your planet is, how it teems with diverse ecosystems and cultures, each with its own set of rules, beliefs, and histories. Perhaps that variety prepared you well for dealing with alien species. Martin stood as well, walking over to stand beside her. She was only a few inches shorter than he was, her posture elegant and poised. In the reflection of the glass, he saw their silhouettes cast against the swirling planet. It looked almost harmonious. I guess humans learned the hard way, battling each other for centuries. By the time we became part of the wider galaxy, we'd either learn tolerance or at least how to fake it, he said wryly. But we still make mistakes. Clearly. A small smile tugged at her lips. Indeed. And so here we are, bound by an archaic law that was designed to protect my people's sense of personal sanctity. Yet that same law may now unite us in a bond neither of us foresaw. Martin's heart thumped in his chest. Serafina, you said a second touch formalizes everything. What if neither of us wants to force that decision? Could we just call it off? Move on? Forget this ever happened? Her silver eyes dimmed momentarily. Even if we wanted to, the law is unyielding. By dawn, a verdict must be made, suitor or transgressor. If you fail to show your worthiness, you're sentenced to death. If you do show it, and I accept, we are bound. Nothing short of an act of the Tribunal High Council could reverse that union, and they do not take such dissolutions lightly. He swallowed hard, the stark reality crashing down on him again. So, it's literally do or die. She nodded, her voice subdued. I wish it were otherwise. For a fleeting moment, her gaze flicked toward him with a longing that made his breath catch. Then abruptly, her composure snapped back into place. I have a personal chamber adjacent to this suite, a place of reflection and spiritual centering. I would like to show it to you. Perhaps it will help us both find clarity. Curiosity trumped caution. All right. She led him through a tall, arched doorway that opened into a smaller, circular room. The lights were dimmed, and in the center stood a low platform surrounded by shallow pools of gently rippling water. An ethereal glow emanated from crystals embedded in the platform, their arrangement forming intricate patterns on the walls. It's beautiful, Martin whispered, removing his boots as he stepped onto the smooth floor. The faint hum of energy made the hairs on his arms stand on end, as though the room itself recognized his presence. Serafina guided him to the platform's edge, where silken cushions formed a half-moon shape. They sat facing each other, the soft trickle of water the only sound. This is a Raelian meditation chamber, she explained, typically reserved for deep introspection. Tonight, perhaps we might learn more about each other, or about the path forward. Her amethyst skin seemed to glow from within, a subtle luminescence that flickered with each breath. Martin realized his own chest felt tight, his pulse thrumming with anticipation. This was more than a conversation or a taste test of exotic wine. This was the heart of the trial. Two souls, laid bare in the confines of a single night, caught between an ancient tradition and the possibility of forging something genuine. As he met her gaze, Martin found himself wondering whether fate, or random chance, had brought them here. And if so, might that shared uncertainty be enough to build a bridge between a humble maintenance tech and a centuries-old judge who could end his life with a word? Morning on Arclight Station crept in quietly, announced not by a rising sun, but by a subtle shift in the station's artificial lighting cycle. In the Raelian meditation chamber, Martin Cole and Serafina Rael still faced each other across the glowing platform. Tension lingered in the air, a delicate membrane between possibility and catastrophe. They'd spent hours discussing everything from moral philosophies to their personal histories. Several times, Martin caught himself leaning closer, an instinct to reach for her hand or press a reassuring touch to her shoulder, only to remember the lethal significance of a second contact. At last, Serafina rose to her feet with measured grace. Her gaze flicked toward a small display embedded in the wall, its characters counting down the hours left until the station's next official day cycle. We have less than an hour before we must present ourselves to the station's council for a formal ruling, she said quietly. I had hoped we might find an alternative, some legal nuance. But the law is clear. A Raelian of my standing cannot simply dismiss an unfulfilled courtship. The only outcomes are acceptance or rejection, and rejection, in this context, is fatal. Martin clenched his fists at his sides, heart thumping like a trapped animal's. I've done everything I can think of to prove I'm not some criminal. Is it enough to count as worthiness by your laws? She hesitated. You've shown more empathy and humility than most who have courted me. But this decision isn't mine alone. The council may question your motives, or mine, for that matter. If they sense any deception, they could override my acceptance. You would still be at risk. A jolt of panic rippled through him. Then what do we do? All night we've been dancing around this second touch. If we don't choose it now, you said it defaults to a failure. But if we do choose it, your council might still strike it down? Serafina drew in a calming breath. My people value honesty above all else. They can sense hesitation. If we commit to this bond, we must do so wholeheartedly, or not at all. The thought of such a profound vow made Martin's stomach churn. He thought of Ebony Reyes, who had texted him multiple times during the night. He'd glanced at the messages, one urging him to remain calm, another hinting that station security had begun investigating whether the Tamri laws could be challenged on a jurisdictional basis. None of it brought him any real comfort. Then let's be real, he said, voice taut. Serafina, in the last hours, I've come to admire you. You're so different from anyone I've known, yet I see glimpses of humanity, of compassion in you. But a marriage? We've only just met. He raked a hand through his hair, exhaling shakily. If our choices are a hasty union or my death sentence, that's not really a choice. It feels like a trap. She closed her eyes, and for a moment her regal composure cracked, revealing the woman beneath the judge. You're right, we've been forced into an impossible scenario, but my people's tradition sees it as fate, a cosmic sign that we were meant to form a partnership, no matter how sudden. I won't pretend it's fair, but I also won't deny what I feel. He blinked. What you feel? She gave a small, sad smile. I've not connected to anyone like this in centuries. It defies reason. Yet, if you choose to flee, I'd ensure you had a head start. I wouldn't let them catch you easily. Martin's chest constricted. The idea of running, disappearing somewhere in the station's labyrinth, maybe even hitching a ride off Arclight, tempted him for a fleeting second. But the memory of Serafina's laughter over a cheeseburger, the earnest glow in her silver eyes, stopped that thought cold. No, he said quietly, I won't run. I may be terrified, but I'm not a coward. Shortly afterward, they stepped back into the main suite, each lost in private contemplation. The remains of their unconventional midnight meal still sat on the table, half-eaten cheeseburgers and empty milkshake cups. For Martin, it felt like stepping from one world into another, a return to the mundane trappings of real life. But the tang of star wine and the soft swirl of Serafina's perfume reminded him that nothing was mundane anymore. A sharp rap on the door startled both of them. One of Serafina's Raelian security officers opened it a crack, leaning in just enough to address her. Pardon, Your Honor. The council has convened an emergency session in the main hall. They request your immediate presence, along with the human, Martin Cole. Serafina nodded with a composure that Martin envied. We'll be there shortly. Once the guard was gone, she turned to Martin. I suspect they won't wait long for us. The next few hours will determine everything. He swallowed hard. Let's get this over with. They left the diplomatic wing under a silent escort. A hush seemed to fall over every corridor they passed through, station staff and visitors alike parting to let them through. Whispers followed in their wake. That's him, the human who touched a Raelian judge. Are they really going to marry? Who is he anyway? Martin forced himself to keep his eyes forward, ignoring the knot twisting in his stomach. The council chamber on Arclight Station was an amphitheater-like space, its ceiling soaring high into a dome of transparent plating. Starlight still filtered in, though the station's artificial dawn cycle lent a pale glow to the interior. Rows of tiered seating circled a central platform, where delegates of various species, each wearing distinctive garments or regalia, awaited the proceedings. At the center stood a raised dais, emblazoned with a large holographic seal representing the Galactic Tribunal. As Martin and Serafina entered, the murmuring escalated. A tall, metallic-scaled alien stepped forward, robes glinting with authority. Martin recognized him from a broadcast or two, Counselor Cialis, a high-ranking official within the tribunal. His deep-set emerald eyes fixed on the pair. Judge Rael, the counselor said, voice resonating, we called this meeting due to concerns that you have been compromised by an opportunistic human. Is it true that you invoked the Tamri laws after an unauthorized contact? Serafina lifted her chin, projecting calm. I invoked them because they were triggered by my station and my rank. I had no choice. Cialis' gaze slid to Martin. Your name is Martin Cole, correct? A maintenance worker? Martin suppressed a flare of defensiveness. Yes, sir. Reports indicate you orchestrated this contact to gain political leverage, Cialis said, tone dripping with skepticism. Your background is conspicuously murky. You appear to be an ordinary laborer, yet you somehow ingratiated yourself to a judge known for her strict adherence to tradition. Martin opened his mouth to protest, but Serafina stepped forward. He orchestrated nothing. The incident was a genuine accident, witnessed by my own security detail. Before Cialis could retort, the chamber doors slammed open with a resounding crash. A lithe figure in a formal black jacket marched in, flanked by two station guards who seemed unsure whether to stop her. To Martin's astonishment, he recognized Taryn Cole, his older sister. She halted in the aisle, sweeping a challenging gaze across the startled assemblage. Well, well, Taryn drawled, voice carrying with the confidence of a seasoned diplomat. Leave my little brother unsupervised for a few days, and he nearly causes an interstellar crisis. Typical Martin. Shock rippled across the chamber. Martin's eyes widened. He hadn't seen Taryn in nearly a year. She'd been traveling off-world on some hush-hush mission for a private coalition. The fact that she was here right now could only mean one thing. Someone had sounded a powerful alarm behind the scenes. Taryn, he whispered, relief and dread mingling in his tone. You didn't have to come. Her keen eyes flicked to him. Didn't have a choice. Word reached the Cole family that you might face execution. Grandfather threatened to mobilize half the old consortium if I didn't step in. Counselor Cialis' mouth hung open for an instant. Then he recovered. You're a member of the Cole dynasty? Taryn's answering smile was more dangerous than any weapon Martin had ever seen. That's right. Perhaps you've heard of us. Among other contributions, we co-drafted the very laws that formed the earliest Earth Galactic treaties. We've rarely meddled in recent affairs, but we haven't lost our connections. Martin here chose a simpler life. Still, a Cole is a Cole. A wave of uneasy murmuring swept through the council. Some delegates suddenly looked very interested in the readouts on their consoles. Others eyed Martin as if seeing him for the first time. That's not public knowledge, Martin muttered. I made sure of it. I wanted to live on my own terms. Taryn's gaze softened slightly. I know, little brother, but that anonymity ends when they threaten your life. She turned her attention to Serafina, scanning the judge with a practiced eye. So you must be the Raelian who caught Martin in this legal snare. Judge Serafina Rael, correct? I've read your case summaries. Impressive track record. Serafina inclined her head. Your information is correct, and it's no simple snare. The Tamri laws bind me as tightly as they do him. The only alternatives to fulfilling the law, acceptance or rejection, would undermine the entire Raelian legal framework. She sounded calm, but Martin noticed the subtle tension in her posture. This abrupt spotlight on their bond was a different kind of trial. Undermine, you say? Taryn pursed her lips, glancing at Counselor Cialis. And yet, the county is prepared to brand Martin a manipulator, maybe even a criminal, for an accidental touch. One might suspect you're afraid that a mere maintenance worker could dethrone your authority. But if that worker happens to be from a lineage as old and powerful as ours, well, that's a diplomatic scandal waiting to happen, isn't it? Cialis' metallic scales dulled in hue, a sign of alien discomfort. We had no idea. Had he declared his lineage? He declared nothing because he's always preferred to fix things rather than flaunt power, Taryn retorted, stepping onto the dais as if she owned it. The security officers exchanged wary glances, but made no move to stop her. So let me be perfectly clear. If you condemn my brother for this so-called offense, You'll have the entire Coal Alliance challenging your ruling. And trust me when I say, we excel at unraveling flawed legislation. Serafina arched a brow. Your threat to the council, it suggests you disapprove of the Tamri laws. Yet I am bound by them, Taryn Cole. If I do not uphold them, I dishonor my people. Taryn turned to her, folding her arms. I respect cultural laws, but I also respect basic fairness. Martin is no conniving politician. If anything, he's an idealist, fixing gravity systems because he believes in making life better for those who rely on them. If you truly place value on honesty, then you know in your heart he's not guilty of manipulating you. A hush settled again, all eyes on Serafina. Martin swallowed, feeling a precarious hope. Could Taryn's intervention actually sway the council? Serafina closed her eyes as though centering herself amid the swirling tension. The murmur of the assembled delegates rose and fell, punctuated by the flickering lights of the dais. After a moment, she opened her eyes, gaze locking with Taryn's. Your defense of your brother is passionate, but it does not negate the final test of the Tamri laws. Whether or not Martin intended this engagement, once the day cycle begins, I must decide. Either accept him as my mate or reject him as an aggressor. The council can weigh in on the validity, yet the ultimate choice rests with me. Ciela stepped forward, seizing the chance to reassert control. Judge Rael, the council's stance is that if you rule in favor of this union without sufficient justification, it sets a dangerous precedent. It would mean any unscrupulous individual could contrive an accidental touch to force marriage with a high-ranking Raelian. We can't allow that. A flicker of indignation crossed Martin's face. I'm not unscrupulous. This was never my plan. I was just trying to file a maintenance report. He heard Taryn's faint snort of agreement. Saelis ignored him, focusing on Serafina. We request proof that this union is genuine. Otherwise, we can't condone the forging of such a bond. It must be accepted by both parties, entirely free of coercion. At that, Taryn laughed outright, the sound echoing in the dome chamber. Free of coercion? You do realize you're essentially threatening Martin with death if he doesn't comply? She spun to address the ring of delegates. That's the real contradiction here. The council claims to protect the integrity of Raelian law, but is quite willing to apply lethal pressure on someone who made a harmless mistake. Serafina's silver eyes flicked to Martin, a silent question swirling in them. He understood. Should we risk it? This entire scenario boiled down to whether their connection, fragile as it was, would stand as proof of sincerity. If Serafina openly declared acceptance, would the council overrule her? Or would they relent? Judge Rael, Martin said softly, finding his voice. Look, I can't promise we'll be soulmates or something equally grand, but I can promise honesty, respect, and an open mind. We can figure this out together if you're willing. If you're not, then let me go and deal with the consequences. Just please don't let your laws kill me without at least considering who I really am. His words hung in the charged air. A flicker of motion on the dais drew Martin's eye. Serafina lifted her right hand, palm outward. It was a Raelian gesture he recognized from a late-night reading of an old cultural text Ebony had dug up, an overture of connection. The first contact was accidental, but the second must be a deliberate choice, an unequivocal signal of acceptance. Around them, the entire chamber seemed to hold its breath. Taryn's eyes narrowed, watchful. Saelis's scales rippled, uncertain. In the stands, delegates leaned forward, as if waiting for a final verdict in a high-stakes trial. Serafina stepped off the dais, descending until she stood mere inches from Martin. Through the hush, he could hear the faint hum of the station's life support systems. Her amethyst skin glowed faintly, reminiscent of how it had glimmered in the meditation chamber. Slowly, she raised her hand until it hovered at Martin's chest, just shy of contact. He swallowed, feeling his pulse pound at his temple. If I do this, she whispered, voice so low only he could hear, there's no going back. Martin nodded. I know. And I'm here, Serafina. Serafina's palm met his chest, a deliberate press that made his heart skip a beat. For an instant, Martin felt a surge of warmth bloom outward from the point of contact. It was as if every cell in his body recognized the weight of this gesture, that he was either safe or doomed, depending on the council's reaction. A collective gasp swept the chamber. In Raelian culture, the second touch was more than a physical link. It was a ceremonial vow. The alien scripts on the dais lit up, verifying a formal acceptance under the Tamri laws. Even without reading the language, Martin sensed the gravity of the moment. The overhead lighting dimmed, replaced by a gentle glow that emanated from the ring of holographic symbols. Cielus's jaw tightened. "So, you claim this is genuine," he said, voice clipped. "Then we must confirm if the council—" He never finished the sentence. At that moment, Taryn Cole took a bold step forward. "I don't think the council has much say if Judge Rael herself has invoked the acceptance clause. By my reading, the law is explicit. Once she initiates the second touch, the marriage is legally binding unless proven fraudulent. Any attempt to override that decision would require a formal hearing, which can't happen instantly." Some of the delegates shuffled uncomfortably, while others conferred in low tones. After a tense pause, one of the council members, an elderly Kalthari female with bulging, amphibious eyes, cleared her throat. "This is highly irregular, but Taryn Cole is correct. The acceptance, if completed, cannot be reversed without formal evidence of deceit. Do we have any such evidence?" Silence. No one spoke up, not even Cielus. Martin felt his breath returning, though his heart still thudded in a frenzied rhythm. He looked down at Seraphina's hand, still resting lightly on his chest. Meeting her gaze, he saw not just the judge, but the woman behind the title. A woman who had known loneliness for centuries, who'd shared star wine and laughter over greasy fast food. Then, to Martin's utter shock, Seraphina slid her hand upward until her fingers curled gently around the back of his neck, drawing him in. Her silver eyes fluttered closed, and she pressed her lips to his in a soft, deliberate kiss. The chamber erupted in gasps, applause, and a few startled cries. Heat flooded Martin's face. The world tilted, the station's gravity momentarily feeling like it was about to fail. He tasted the faint sweetness of milkshake and star wine on her lips, recognized the subtle electric tingle of her Raelian physiology. Time froze, and for those precious seconds, there was only the two of them. When they broke apart, the hush that fell over the council felt profound. Even Taryn appeared momentarily lost for words. Seraphina's cheeks were tinted a deeper shade of amethyst, though she stood tall, addressing the chamber with a measured calm. "Let the record show that I, Judge Seraphina Rael, accept this bond freely. The Tamri laws are satisfied. Martin Cole is neither a criminal nor a manipulator, but my chosen consort." A stunned half-cheer, half-murmur rippled through the assembly. The ring of holographic symbols flashed, finalizing the marriage under Raelian law. They were married. Just like that. Martin struggled to breathe normally as chaos descended upon the council chamber. Delegates rushing forward to offer or demand clarifications. Security officers tried to maintain order, while Taryn and Seraphina exchanged pointed looks, one assessing what came next, the other bracing for the inevitable avalanche of political repercussions. Cielus, his scales dull with frustration, declared a recess, allowing the newly bonded couple to exit under guard before the station's authorities could swarm them with questions. Once they were outside, Taryn let out a sharp exhale. "Well, that escalated quickly. You sure know how to keep life interesting, Martin." Her features softened, and she embraced him in a swift hug. "I'm glad you're alive, little button, even if this is the wildest wedding ceremony I've ever witnessed." Martin returned the embrace, then turned to Seraphina. She stood a short distance away, conferring with one of her Raelian guards. When she caught his eye, a gentle smile touched her lips. In that moment, Martin realized that despite the whirlwind circumstances, the raw emotion he felt was real. He stepped over, taking a careful breath before speaking. "So, we did it. We're married." Seraphina inclined her head, her shimmering amethyst complexion still showing hints of an inward glow. "It appears we are. I realize this isn't how most unions begin in your society." Martin let out a wry laugh. "Not quite, but we humans adapt, and I suppose you're used to rapid developments in court cases, if nothing else." Her expression turned pensive. "Marriages of convenience or political expedience happen in many species, but this is different. I sense the sincerity in your eyes. It makes me hopeful that we can shape a bond not just constrained by law, but nurtured by our true selves. From the look on Taryn's face, she had about 100 questions. What happens next? Are we talking about a formal ceremony on Earth or some follow-up with the tribunal? Because there's going to be a lot of bureaucratic red tape to cut through, especially if you plan to remain on Arclight Station. Serafina nodded thoughtfully. In Raelian tradition, after the acceptance comes the formal announcement to our homeworld. However, I also have duties as a traveling judge for the Galactic Tribunal. Combining these demands with Martin's post here on the station will require negotiation. Well, Taryn mused, the Cole family has no shortage of experience in negotiating. Grandfather might even volunteer to orchestrate a lavish wedding on Earth if you want a more conventional celebration. But you might want to politely decline. He tends to offer gifts that are difficult to store, like entire private moons or decommissioned star bases. Martin shook his head vigorously. No moons, please. I can barely keep my bunk tidy, let alone manage orbital real estate. Besides, he added more softly, I'd prefer something simpler. Maybe on Earth, near where I grew up. A place that reminds us of what truly matters. A flicker of fondness lit Serafina's silver eyes. I've never attended a human wedding that wasn't purely ceremonial. If it's your custom, I'd like to see what it's all about. Taryn folded her arms, satisfied for now. All right, you two handle the romance. I'll manage the legal side. Thankfully, because of your new status, Martin, you won't face immediate job termination, though the station might require you to take a leave of absence. They'll be confused about how to classify you, technical staff or a galactic dignitary's consort. Martin groaned, imagining the mountain of paperwork. Guess I'll be filling out a lot more forms than my usual maintenance logs. Serafina offered a half smile, resting a hand gently on his arm, this time without dire consequences. The weight of that simple touch was still immense, but it felt reassuring now. One thing at a time, she said. We'll inform the tribunal, calm the council, and then perhaps find a moment to breathe. They turned to leave the corridor, only to be met by a fleet of reporters from the station's media wing, cameras flashing and drones hovering. In unison, Martin and Serafina heaved a mutual sigh. The story of the maintenance worker forced into marriage with a galactic judge was evidently too juicy to ignore, and now they were at the center of a spectacle that would spread across star systems. But Martin squared his shoulders, exchanging a glance with Serafina. They'd figure this out together, one press conference at a time. Looking back, it's astonishing how a single, unintended brush of shoulders could spark a union that transcended species, legalities, and personal fears. Martin and Serafina found themselves bound not by obligation alone, but by a shared sense of purpose, repairing the very cracks that divide countless worlds. Their story reminds us that sometimes what seems like an impossible situation can unlock the greatest possibilities. As someone who followed their journey, I can't help feeling hopeful for our own lives. That chance encounters might lead us to extraordinary connections, and that empathy can bridge the gaps between vastly different perspectives. I invite everyone to leave a comment and share your thoughts. Would you have chosen love or risked everything to remain free? Let's discuss it together and keep the conversation growing.